Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. So next up is that quilt rack or quilt ladder for my wife's quilting room. I've already pre-milled some lumber, just kind of rough sizes, just to get me in the ballpark so I'm not waiting on material to acclimate as I move on in the project. I also built a small template that fits in the space in her room that she wants it to be in. So I have notes all over this, kind of just giving me some guidance and direction because this is certainly nowhere near the same size as this. But this will all become apparent as we move on. The important part was the angles. I don't know if you can see that down on the end there. The angles for the tilt. And I've actually already set a gauge for that, and so that it fits where it's supposed to go. And then there's a flat that goes against the wall, and I have a gauge for that as well. So based off of those angles, I've got a little mock-up in there, and I'll take you in and show you this little cheesy mock-up. Just scrap material tossed together with a couple of screws so I could get some more numbers and some more direction for the final piece. This stack of material here, I'm still at a little bit of a loss as to which way I'm going to go. I'm leaning towards a little wider rung on them rather than the dowel, but we'll see what happens when I get there. But for now, let me move you into her quilting room, and I'll show you the little mock-up that I did. And so all of this stuff will start to make sense for you. Okay, so this is kind of my little flimsy mock-up here. Like I said, the important part for this to me was getting this angle to make sure that it met the wall and the bottom of the shelf correctly, as well as the floor. And I also wanted to get an appropriate height for this bottom one. Now this particular one's just a little bit too tall. But it's fairly close. The final will also be just a little bit wider than this. Again, this was more about the angles and whatnot than it was the overall width. It'll fit this space a little bit better. She does want this to be narrower than this, so I'm going to do that. But just a small mock-up to really dial in these angles and stuff for me. So let's get back to the real piece and let's get this one knocked out. So I'm set up over here at the miter saw and I've set it to the angle that I need. And for the record, for me, this is, just shy of 17 degrees. But the number is irrelevant as long as the setup stays the same for everything. And I will leave this set up until all these pieces are cut. So I'm going to get these all cut with the angles and cut to length, and then we'll move on. So with those all cut and the boards situated where they need to go, it's time to get those flats up here on the back, like this. Okay, so I decided I wanted roughly a 3-inch flat spot, so it gave me a nice mark there, and then just use that bevel gauge that I came up with earlier to go ahead and mark that line. Now all I need to do is go ahead and get those cut, and that will identify my tops as well as my left and right, and we can get going on the verticals. This angle will come in handy again should I decide to use the flat stock rather than the dowel. All right, so I hope all these marks show up on camera. This is my bottom, and I know that my first mark needs to go 24 inches up, and then they're just 15 inches from there the rest of the way up. But to figure out how they lie on the inside, I have to turn this up and then follow the angle of my foot, or the floor angle. So I just literally carry those marks over all the way up, and I do this on both of them. Then from there, I'll find center, and that will help me guide everything to get whatever I come up with here or here into the right place. Okay, so I know this is pretty hard to see. Taking those lines that I laid on the rails for where I wanted these hangers spaced, I carried those lines across the face parallel to the floor. So I used my angle finder, and then I cut these at 4 inches, so I just marked a center point just for reference. I don't know that I'm actually going to need that yet, because these will actually end up all coming up on kind of like this, more towards the middle. But I've just got them set in here for spacers for now. I'm going to use the domino to attach all of these, and I've cut a spare as well so that I can locate the domino appropriately. But I'm going to put a domino in the center of each one of these before I take these to the router table and round them all over. These all still have very sharp edges. And before I change that setting, I need to cut the wall bracket for that in. Let me rearrange the camera and I'll show you a little bit more what's going on with the wall bracket on that end. Okay, again, I know this is very difficult to see, but on this end, we have this flat part under here that's for the wall, and this piece is going to go in something like this. So my reference for the domino is off of this flat edge and this flat edge, and I've also marked this with where my reference edge is to make sure that I locate the dominoes correctly. Now before I change my depth or do anything to locate for all of these rails, I'm going to cut all 4 of these dominoes so that I know that I'm flush with this back face and ready to attach to the wall. All right, so with that end piece positioned, now it's time to come back in and get all of these aligned. And I think I'm going to shoot for center on these, and then we'll come back and round over all the edges. But I need to reset up for the domino and get all of these located first. All right, so there's the first dry fit, and I'm actually pretty happy with that. Still a lot of work to do. I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to go ahead and take it to the router table and start rounding all of these edges over. And of course sand this. I'm going to sand this up through 180. The finish on this is going back a little bit old school. I'm going to armor seal it and probably hit it with a lacquer because of the blankets rubbing over this all the time. I don't want those hard wax oils rubbing off on the blankets, so I'm going to put a film finish on this one. But let me get the softening done and all of that. I'll probably also take a trim router to these edges and just knock down the sharp edges. But lots of router work and sanding to go before we go ahead and put this in a glue up. Okay, we'll just let that cure up. All right, so nearly complete. I just got some finish left. I'm going with General Finishes Armor Seal because I really like the way it looks on walnut. But I'm going to chase that up in the morning when it cures. I'm going to chase that up with some lacquer just because this quilts hang over this. I don't really want anything oil-based on the rungs themselves. So I'm going to get this oil-based on tonight. I will see you guys in the morning when the clear's all on it, and we'll get it mounted and maybe get a little tour of that quilting room. All right, well there it is, all in its final home. Super happy with how it turned out. I ended up letting this sit in the shop for probably a couple of days and just letting the lacquer off gas. But I purposely covered it with lacquer so that anything oil-based didn't rub off on the quilts as she uses the ladder. So that's going to wrap it up for the woodworking portion of this one, guys. This really is a one-day build, but a little bonus coverage because a few people have asked if you want to tour the quilting room. I'll go ahead and run the camera around the room and explain what I can. I'm not a quilter, so I won't even pretend to guess what a bunch of this stuff is, but I'll at least take you around the room and give you a look, and we'll start over here in this corner. So in this corner, obviously, is her fabric storage, and I still have more of these boxes to build on this wall. I just haven't got to them yet. As well, she has a guest quilter spot. So if somebody wants to come and quilt with her, she can sit here at the very first quilting desk that I ever made and quilt with her. It's got the lift in it and the removable insert and all that good stuff. So we're gonna move, well, let's move this way and we'll get around to her main quilting area, and then we'll come back and tie up the center and the back end of the room. Okay, so this is just more of a little bit of a countertop space for a horizontal surface to clutter up with more drawer storage in it. This was part of the quilting desk that we had for her in Washington, so I just repurposed the cabinet for in here. You can see the back side of her quilting desk there, and this whole side is just cubbies that have plastic bins and more material and things like that stored, or she could store particular projects or whatever it is she chooses to store. We also have standalone internet out here so she can stream TV while she's working in here or whatever she wants to do. So we'll move around and kind of show you this wall. Okay, so moving around, this is the primary station that I built for her. This is on video some time ago. Just a huge tabletop. This was all done in alder, believe it or not, with walnut drawer fronts. Her sewing machine is on a lift. It raises and lowers as she needs it to. And that hardware is available through Rockler, so it really made the process pretty simple. And this is her tracing table that's in the back here. And that build is part of this desk series when we did that. So yeah, just her big quilting desk. So move further down and get around her cutting table and stuff. So down here fairly close to her actual work desk is her huge cutting table. And obviously I made this a little higher. This bench was made at the same time that I made my assembly table for the shop. Now this one is still a work in progress as she decides what she wants for storage and things like that. The only thing we've done to it so far is put this big roll of batting on here, and that's on a removable dowel that locks in, so she can't bump it off. It is on casters, so if she needs to, put this up on wheels and roll it around by herself, she can do that. Behind me is an ironing station, and you guys will get a chuckle out of that. And let me rearrange the camera so you can see her ironing station. All right, so many of you recognize the ironing station. It is. It's the bench that my son and I built together. He's currently in an apartment in a newlywed, so he didn't have room for the bench. So it sits in here, and my wife gets use out of it. Is an ironing table. And of course, in the corner is the computer server that I did It's been a couple years ago, and that's all up and running now. So that's where all my stuff is stored. And yeah, it's functioning really well. The temperature controls and the fans, everything work really well on it. As well, her room has its own dedicated mini split, so she can maintain temperature in here all year round and come out here and work anytime she wants. And last but not least in this room is her long arm. I'm not going to even pretend to tell you I know how to run this piece of equipment. I don't. The way it's described to me is a CNC for quilting. Moving down off of this end is another piece of original equipment that I built for us, a little quilted maple cabinet, just more storage and work surface for while she's at this machine. And a bobbin storage thing over here that I built for her a couple of years ago, and I can't believe she doesn't have that filled up yet, but I'm sure she will get there. And of course this down here is what's called her storyboard. So this is just rigid foam insulation behind here. So as she makes squares for a quilt, she will come put them up and pin them so that she can assess the order and all of that. And then when she's ready, then she takes them down and takes them to her machine and goes to town. So that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. Never in a million years would I have thought I was going to make a video about quilting, but there it is. So until next time, guys, take care.